In this video, we look at configuration file for different servers such as application server, process scheduler, and web server. So we'll start with application server first. So whenever you invoke psadmin, you are given an option where it will show you what are the different homes. Right now in psadmin, you can see ps configuration home is d ptconfig, ps home is d tools855, and ps app home is d hc9.2. which means when we will configure our domains, this is going to be our configuration home where we'll find our configuration files as well as log files. So let's go to this directory first, dptconfig. So right now we are in dptconfig, which is configuration home, and here you can see there are multiple folders. First one is appsrv. So let's go with this. In appsrv, you will find PRCS, which is for process scheduler. Then you have pshrvdmo, which is nothing but our app server domain name. So let's go inside this. And inside this, you will find other files and some directories. So let's look at some of the configuration files here. The configuration file for application server is psappsrv. You can see it is a configuration file. So let's open it. Before we talk about this, let's look at how this file is created. So when you invoke psadmin and you start to create a new domain, you are asked to provide details of domain parameters. And once you load all those details, this file will be created with the values that you have provided. Many of these are default values and some are the ones that you provide in quick configure menu. This configuration file is used by application server to execute processes. So first section is startup, where you will find information about database. You have database name, database type, user ID. This is the encrypted user password. Then you have connect ID, connect password, again encrypted. These are some of the parameters which can be used for advanced configuration, but this is how default it looks like. You have some other parameters for security, inter-domain events, workstation listener. If you are planning to configure 3-tier, which means you are planning to connect from your application designer, this is what you will be using. You will need to provide this port number in your configuration manager. Jot listener is the port which will be used by the web server to connect to application server. So you may want to note this down because this is the value which you need to provide to your web server. Then you have few more parameters, log directory, allow dynamic changes. By default it is no. If you make allow dynamic changes equal to Y, in that case you will be able to make few changes into this configuration file and not reconfigure the application server domain. Mostly when you make changes to this configuration file, you have to reload the application server configuration domain. But if you select this, then there are few parameters such as recycle count, trace ppr, trace pr, log fence. These can be changed dynamically if you mark it as Y. This section is for logging. By default, the log fence is equal to 3. If you want to increase the logging capability, what you can do is increase this value. It can go up to 5, and which is tracing level 3. But make sure that you do it only for temporary purpose. Because if you leave it at 5, you will have a lot of logs generated for anything which is done in PeopleSoft, and you may run out of disk space. So use this value, increase this value only when you're troubleshooting an issue. Then similarly, you have another settings for PeopleCode debugger. This is the debugger port. If you want to trace anything in application designer, if you want to go to debug mode, these are the port that will be used. Again, this is used for tracing. If you want to add more logs to your PeopleSoft log, you can use these values. You can create a combination of these values and put the value. Right now default is 0, but let's say if you want to track SQL statements and SQL statement variable, what you will do is the value will be changed to 1 plus 2, which is 3. So you have to change it to 3. Similarly, you can add more if you want to gather this information including these two. So you will have 1 plus 2 plus 1024. So then it will be able to get information of these three. Similarly, you have people code tracing and a lot of other tracing. You can trace almost anything with application server. You can trace application engine using this value. Similarly, whatever value you provide here could be a combination of these values, and these are the details of what will be traced. These are some of the settings for your cache. This this section is for remote call. If you're using COBOL, in that case you will have to use this settings. You may have to make changes to this if you're doing some debugging. And right now this section covers settings which are specific to PeopleSoft processes. Like this one, psappsrv, as you know, it is a PeopleSoft Application Server process. And these are minimum instances and maximum instances, which means when you boot your application server, it's going to start a minimum of 3 psappsrv, and it's going to start maximum of 3 psappsrv services. If you want to increase this dynamically, what you can do is change the max value to, let's say, 5 or 6, whatever you need. And then if there is more load on the application server will automatically add new services. To take an example that you have load, to take an example that all 3 psappsrv servers are already busy with load, and if application server feels like there is more services needs to be started, it will start additional plus, which means it will start 4 and then 5 and then 6. So it will start a maximum of 6. This is the recycle count after our application server has processed so many transactions. Then it will automatically recycle, means reboot that app server process. Similar to psappsrv, you have similar values for PS analytics servers and all the other processes that run on an application server. psappsrv, quick, query srv used for query services, and these are for integration broker. Again, integration broker. And these are settings for SMTP. If you want to send emails, then you would want to configure the values here. You may have to provide the SMTP port number, which is by default 25, and then you may have to provide email IDs from which email you want to send the emails. Then there are other parameters for search, run server. So as you know, there are hundreds of parameters in PS app server configuration file, and you may not want to remember all these, but because whenever you need to make some change, go to PeopleBooks and look for it, because it's not recommended to remember. Just remember all the important ones which you will need most likely in most of the cases. Like when you're debugging, you need to know where to change the log fence, how to trace the SQL, and if you want to make changes to configuration, how to change the database name and how to change the user ID, password, some of those things. If you want to increase the app server processes, so where to change the minimum instances, where to change the maximum instances, and how to change the recycle count, those are some of the things which you will be using more frequently. Other configurations you might be doing, but that would be like you have to do it once. You won't be doing those as frequently as you would change other logging settings. So this was all about psappsrv configuration file. There are other configuration files which are used in conjunction with psappsrv, such as psappsrv.env. It stores the environment related information like your paths. Then you have this ubx file, you have pstux configuration file. It is created when you create a domain. Now let's go to logs. So these are the logs for your application server domain. In the logs directory, when you come here, you will see a lot of log files. As you can see, there are log files for different processes. This is for watch server, this is for app server process, this is for monitor server process, and analytics server process, PS run server. So each process will create its own log file. Other than that, there are few primary log files that you want to look at when you're trying to debug an issue. This is tux log. So let's open this, and the tux log, you will go down so that you get the latest logs, and you can look at the activity. If there are some errors, then you will get those errors here, and you can use this log file to get most of the information about the error. Another important file is psappsrv. Open this file. Right now there's much activity going on, so this file is quite empty, but you got the idea that you have to look at these files. And also, as you can see, the latest file is 22.517 and this one is 24. So every day a new file is created for these processes. So you will have an archive. Keep an eye on this as well. You may want to delete old files because otherwise they take a lot of space. If you enable logging, then these will rapidly increase in size. Also, when you enable tracing and you want to trace your PeopleSoft activity, P activity, there is another directory that will be created, which is log output. And in that log output, you will find the trace files that can be used. So this was about application server. What are the important configuration files for application server and how to look for the logs in your application server.